It was called the Great War. The War of the Nations. The war to end all wars. And yet, we know it today as the First World War. What went wrong? This is the story of the failed alliance. Woodrow Wilson's chance. July 28, 1914. Due to a system of tangling alliances, countries all over the world erupted in conflict. Austria-Hungary, Serbia, France, England, and Russia, all the most powerful and influential countries in the world were involved. Except for one. The United States of America. The U.S. stayed out of the conflict, trying to remain neutral in order to preserve trade alliances and the safety of its people. For 3 years, America stood by the wayside, trying to keep out of the conflict. President Woodrow Wilson was praised for keeping the U.S. out of the war. It was one of the major reasons for his re-election in 1916. Not 1 month after his second inauguration, however, Wilson approached Congress with a war message. On April 6, 1917, America entered the war. America entered the war on the side of the French and the English, who were at a stalemate with Germany and Japan. World War I was fought using 20th century technology like machine guns, heavy artillery, barbed wire, and mustard gas, but with outdated 19th century tactics. Trench warfare was treacherous and often deadly. Soldiers were in constant danger from weaponry, but also from disease. Trench foot, for example, often resulted in gangrene and amputation. It was no surprise, then, that when the war finally ended in 1918, American casualties were catastrophic. 126,000 men were killed. Another 234,000 were wounded. 4,500 men were prisoners of war or missing. And those lucky enough to return home had little chance at a normal life. H.G. Wells called World War I the war to end war, and his thoughts echoed those of many Americans.
What of our pledges to the men that lie dead in France?
President Wilson would later ask.
We said that they went over there, not to prove the prowess of America, or her readiness for another war, but to see to it that there never was such a war again.
Wilson wanted to end war once and for all. His opportunity to do so came at the Paris Peace Conference, a meeting of the Allied victors to set terms for the defeated Central Powers. Wilson was an important decision-maker, though he didn't always agree with the other major leaders. David Lloyd George, Prime Minister of England, Georges Clemenceau, Prime Minister of France, and Vittorio Emanuele Orlando, Prime Minister of Italy. At the Paris Peace Conference, Wilson delivered one of the most famous speeches in history, his 14-point speech. He had 5 main objectives: the end of secret treaties, a global reduction in arms, clarified colonial claims, freedom of the seas, and, most important of all, world peace, which he intended to achieve through a cooperative League of Nations. The League would help maintain peace and diplomacy all over the world through a multinational alliance. Outlined by the Covenant of the League of Nations, countries would band together and reach peaceful settlements in place of war. Upon returning home after the conference, Wilson received a lot of support, but also encountered a lot of opposition. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge was the main voice for the opposition. He said, in a speech entitled simply League of Nations,
"The independence of the United States is not only more precious to ourselves, but to the world than any single possession. The United States is the world's best hope, but if you fetter her in the interests and quarrels of other nations, if you tangle her in the intrigues of Europe, you will destroy her power for good and endanger her very existence. Leave her to march freely through the centuries to come, as in the years that have gone. Strong, generous, and confident, she has nobly served mankind. Beware how you trifle with your marvelous inheritance, this great land of ordered liberty. For if we stumble and fall, freedom and civilization everywhere will go down in ruin.
Others, however, supported Wilson in his view for global cooperation. Senator Gilbert Hitchcock gave an invective speech titled, "The Trouble with Senators Who Oppose the League of Nations." He said,
"The late war cost 7 million lives and millions more of cripples. It has destroyed hundreds of towns. It has widowed millions of wives. It has brought in its train the inevitable consequences of war, pestilence, and famine. One of the war diseases alone has cost this country over 300,000 lives of the civilian population. It has let loose and inflamed the passions and lusts of man and crushed and humiliated millions of women. Massacres, torture, and assassinations have accompanied it. Law and order have been overthrown. Bolshevism and anarchy have been propagated. The confidence of men in government has been shaken. It will never be restored until governments devise some way to end war. The League of Nations is that way."
At this time, however, Congress would not approve joining the League without many revisions to the treaty. People didn't want to be so dependent on Europe, preferring to stick with traditional isolationist policy. Wilson, however, refused to compromise. He adamantly believed that his version of the League was the only route to success. He thought, too, that the public supported him. With popular support, he would be able to force Congress to approve joining the League. Wilson went on a public speaking tour all over the country, speaking every day or even several times a day for weeks. On October 2, 1919, his tour was cut short. Due to extreme exhaustion, Wilson suffered a severe stroke, incapacitating his mental faculties and partially paralyzing his left side. Returning to the White House, he remained an invalid for the last years of his presidency. Needless to say, Congress did not decide to join the League. Even without the involvement of the United States and Wilson, its creator, the League began operating and had several early successes. In the 1921 debate between Sweden and Finland concerning the Åland Islands, a League investigation showed that the islands belonged to Finland, settling the argument before it came to blows. In 1925, shortly after the Greek invasion of Bulgaria, the League ordered Greece to withdraw. It did. The League was also responsible for returning thousands of prisoners of war and setting up refugee camps. The greatest achievement of the League of Nations was the Kellogg-Briand Pact. 65 countries signed the pact and agreed to not go to war to resolve disputes of any origin. But in the end, it didn't matter. After its initial successes, the League of Nations couldn't achieve much. It met only 4 times each year and had a lot of business to attend to in a short time. The League did not have an army of its own. Its primary method of persuasion was to have member countries stop trading with a given target. This was effective with smaller countries, but not so much with large countries. The US, not a member, would continue to trade with countries blocked by the League of Nations, undermining its efforts. During Hitler's rise to power, many European leaders tried to prevent him from violating the various anti-war treaties that had been signed, but because they had no real methods of enforcement, they failed to stop him. Because of its failure in preventing the Second World War, the League of Nations was replaced with a new, but similar, organization called the United Nations. Still in action today, the United Nations learned from the mistakes of the League. The UN has its own army, separate from those of its member nations, giving it power unto itself. The UN does more than just keep the peace. In various ways, it has done things like save the pyramids, eradicate smallpox, protect the ozone layer, and help children in underdeveloped countries. Because of his work in taking a stand, Wilson was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 1919. Though Woodrow Wilson's alliance failed, his efforts are responsible for creating an organization that has saved and improved the lives of millions of people around the world.